Kevin Cann, thank you so much for taking your time speaking to me today. Highly looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. It's delightful to talk about these type of topics in a very skeptical world.
Yeah, truly. All right. Kevin, you are a retired IT professional, Navy nuclear engineer, and a mystic who has spent a lifetime exploring extraordinary phenomena and the nature of reality. As an autistic individual, you attribute unique perspectives and transformative experiences, including UFO encounters and near death phenomena, to your heightened access to intuitive and imaginal thought. You co authored How to Think Impossibly with Jeffrey Kripal. You've also developed Platonic Surrealism, a framework that seeks to stabilize and expand human understanding of spiritual, emotional, and anomalous experiences, aiming to help others navigate and prepare for the impossible. Can you explain what Platonic Surrealism is and how you developed it as a framework for understanding reality?
Of course, my pleasure. In a manner of speaking, Platonic Surrealism has been, as the vernacular is these days, it's been downloading to my brain probably since I was in the womb. I was aware in the womb. And, here I was, a young man in Minnesota, on a farm in the Bible Belt. And they didn't know what autism was. And I had a hard time fitting in. But let's call it, let's call it today the larger life. The larger life, some people like to say the phenomenon. The phenomenon tends to be more of a UFO, UAP term, and it's often taken to be a negative thing, like, on Skinwalker Ranch, that sort of thing. Um, but really, it's generally only negative if you start things off as negative. I've lived with this aspect of life my entire life. I'm 63 years old. I've lived with it in peace, mostly. At first, I didn't quite understand how things work, but mostly in peace for 63 years. So um, I would get these Gnostic experiences when I was young. One of the first is I was suddenly not in my body, and I felt like I was made entirely of light, and everything was too bright, too loud, too overwhelming, and there was no human body to be found. It felt like my true essence. That's what I was experiencing. Another time, I felt myself being turned inside out, and I blew up to the size of a universe, and it was very painful. I'm not talking about just something like Daydream. I'm talking about like it was really happening, and I was, you know, like in the movie Avatar. I was in the Avatar in the world, and it was really happening, and it was really me. So, um, I've had numerous experiences with what Jeff Kripal calls the Imaginal. That's a great term. Um, one time I was driving on a mountain road, and I was suddenly overcome with this golden glowing light, and a soft, almost voice said, "Foot off the gas or you die in 3 seconds." So, that's unusual enough. So I did it. And 3 seconds later, I turned a blind curve and a deer sprang out. I would have hit it and fallen off the mountain and died. So I've had a lot of experiences in my life. And as a result, um, I needed a way to understand them. Uh, like a lot of people, I looked into religion, I looked into spiritual systems, Eastern, Western, all of them. And none of them were any good for me personally. I mean, some people prosper with this system or that, but none of them worked for me. And though I did spend quite a bit of time, I was actually part of a Kundalini yoga research organization for a number of years. And there's a trust me, I'm getting to the point about Platonic Surrealism. I got to set the table here, though. So they were big into using science to research what Kundalini was, the force latent in human people that makes you enlightened or whatever. There's so many stories, fish stories, really. But, they wanted me to work on the science of it, so I did. And so I told them one day, I realized what it is now, in part. Uh, the sage, the Hindu sage that their organization was built on, who had died a few years earlier, I realized he had Asperger's syndrome. And they threw me out. Just that day, gone. Don't say our holy man had Asperger's syndrome, because some people consider that a disability. So that's the sort of life that led to Platonic Surrealism. Now, I guess I'll drop kind of one of my top 3 biggest events in my life. So I'd been part of various organizations and groups for spirituality, religion, various philosophies, and none of them worked for me. I had all these experiences, and none of them could help or explain them. And at the last, I had this intuition that I should look into ufology. And I'd never really been interested in it, but I had this intuition that if I got into ufology, I might realize what spirituality was. And it turned out to be perfectly correct. So, I had a lifelong experience of mystical knowledge, and I decided I was going to, as an experiment, summon a UFO. And I was certain I could do it. And so I worked on it for a while, and then I felt ready. So I started the summoning process. I've documented it in various places, to greater or lesser degrees of detail. And so I started the summoning, and I realized it wasn't going to work. I could feel it wasn't going to work. So I adjusted the procedure, and it still wasn't going to work. So I tried about 5 things from, they were basically spiritual exercises. Because I was convinced that UFOs had a spiritual component, and if they have a spiritual component, like Jacques Vallée would say, that they could be summoned. And finally, I just kind of had it. I knew I could do it. So I clenched my left fist, and I just exerted my will. And I exerted my will that this was going to happen. No excuses. Kicking or screaming, I don't care what you want, Mr. UFO. I'm going to drag your ass here, and you're going to appear. And so I just kept that will going for 3 days. Even when I slept, it was going pretty much. I just kept it going, taking no prisoners, no excuses. And after 3 days of exerting my will like this, I became completely exhausted, and I fell into a deep sleep. And I didn't wake up till I think 4 in the afternoon on the 3rd day. And, by then I just had kind of forgotten about the experiment because, well, there was no UFO, right? So I made myself lunch. I had this microwave pasta, and I put it in the microwave, and then I was going to take the wrapping of the microwave meal out to the plastic recycling as a good recycler. So I took it, and I was going to move in the direction of the rear door when suddenly this dwarf-like creature walked in, looked at me, and I was paralyzed. I was paralyzed for 15 minutes. I could not move. I staggered back into my chair, and I couldn't move anything except my eyes or barely breathe. And that was very distressing. And what's interesting I want to make sure and bring up the point of the imaginal. You see, people will see something, and even if it looks completely physical, they assume that what it looks like is what it means, and that's all there is to it. But with the imaginal, there's always symbols involved. And the symbol of this, I realized when I was paralyzed thinking about this. And the little dwarf who came in my patio door had every opportunity in the world to hurt me, but it's very interesting. Despite all the claptrap, some people say, "Oh, these are demons." Well, if you're paralyzed and helpless, they don't hurt you. It doesn't sound very demony to me. So, in any case, I realized the thing was a dead copy of a memory I had from the movie Phantasm 4. In the movie Phantasm 4, they had these little dwarf things, and it's exactly what it looked like. And these little dwarf things were the human dead that had been compressed down into dwarf size, and then they were given duties in the afterlife. That's what this looked like. So it took me years to really understand what that meant. What that meant is that all this has something to do with consciousness, the processing of consciousness. So anyway, after I could move again, I said, well, I'm not going to be scared. Dang it, I'm from Minnesota. I'm a tough farm boy. I'm not going to be scared. So I went in the backyard with my plastic microwave meal wrapping. I put it in the recycling container, and then I had this kind of electrical field at the back of my neck. I looked up, and there was the UFO. And this wasn't like a vision or a hallucination or anything like that. It felt, as they say, realer than real. Like it was from a place that was more real than our world. And it was a black triangle UFO. It looked like it was made out of kind of like cheddar cheese that was gunmetal. It had a red light on each corner and a central arc light. And it had rivets. I could see the rivets clearly. Now it appeared, I had nothing to scale it with, right? I mean, if it was like next to a tree, I could go, oh, it's about the size of a tree, right? But I had nothing there were no towers or mountains or anything around. So I really don't know how far away it was, but it looked pretty close. I could see all details. And it was coming from the east. I could see it so clearly, and I could feel a connection with it. Like it was connected to me. And I talked to it. And I said, "Oh, come on now! You look like you're on a Star Trek. You look like you could take the Enterprise 2 times out of 3 in a space combat. Come on now, assume another form." And I heard this chuckle, yeah, a chuckle, and it turned into a ship from an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's the one where the guy was like a Q-like guy, and he was living on a planet with his wife, and he didn't want to be bothered, and he summoned a ship to scare off the Enterprise. So it looked just like that ship. And I go, oh, come on, that's still a ship. I think you might be a ferry or something. Like, come on, give me something different. And it turned into a giant cube with a pyramid inside of it. And finally, it turned into a fantasy creature out of the Dungeons and Dragons game, the Beholder, kind of a giant floating eyeball thing with tentacles coming out of it. And I said, well, why don't you go back to your original form? I know people are going to say that this is an Aurora craft or something. All this nonsense drivel. People want this nuts and bolts so bad. They want it to be some government black, project thing. And, I'm sure there are government black project things, but this wasn't one of them. And I go, could you show me the top, please? So that, I can see there are no exhausts. ports or anything like that, nothing aerodynamic. And so it very, very nicely, was back to being a black triangle UFO, and showed me the top and the side, and moved around and modeled for me. It was very polite. And all this happened about over a 45-second period of time. It went from one horizon to the next, pretty slow and casual, showing off, sporting off, what it was. I also, I had a little test protocol. I wanted to gain data because, I was a scientist almost. I was an engineer, a technician, So I wanted to know, what if it's just being beamed into my mind? If it's being beamed into my mind, I could close my eyes and I'd still see it. But nope, I closed my eyes and it was gone. Opened my eyes and it was there. And also, there was the thing some people call the Oz effect, where I felt like space around me, just the region around me for like maybe half a mile, was felt like some other dimension or something. It was all electrical and it was just different, and there was no sound in the Oz report. Oz reports out there sometimes. There was no sound at all. In fact, I heard this sound, just a little sound, and I looked over about 10 feet away, and there was a gnat beating its wings, and that's what the sound was. I could hear the gnat beating its wings. Well, I'm half deaf. So from the Navy, the roaring of the nuclear engines in the engine room. So it finally just floated over the horizon and was gone. Now, the reason I went over that is I'm sure you wanted to hear about that event anyway. It's featured in the book. But I needed to tell that story so I could explain why the Platonic Surrealism. Because I got to tell you, I was ontologically shocked like you cannot believe. I mean, you could be Mr. Smarty Pants and think you understand things and this and that, but when something shows up and goes tap, tap, tap on your shoulder, that's a whole different thing. I may have had all these anomalous experiences and all this and that, but I'm just a guy that puts his pants on one leg at a time too, just a regular person. So it shredded me. It absolutely shredded me. What was the most disturbing is when I'd been paralyzed for 15 minutes. That didn't seem very friendly. So it was just horrific to me. I thought, according to the old lore, if you summon something, you're supposed to have control over it. Well, no, not necessarily. Or I didn't know what I was doing, but it was such a cordial interaction, It was more like a partnership, like this was going to happen, it was part of the grand plan, so to speak. So, I really needed to make sense of all this stuff, and nobody in the world had anything that made sense of it. And, if I was some scholar like Jeffrey Kripal or something, he could say, well, there was Henry Corbin, and there was, Jung, and this person, and William James, and all these people, and he could talk for several hours about how there's this thing called the Imaginal, and theoretically this all makes sense, and that's all well and good for a scholar, but I'd had something show up and go tap, tap, tap on my shoulder. So I just couldn't, it just didn't do anything for me. So I came to realize that I'd been fed knowledge of Platonic Surrealism my whole life. And so I would just wake up in the morning and start writing, Sometimes I'd write 10 pages and the knowledge was just there. It's like I had an active muse, And so I've been writing for the last 10 years about Platonic Surrealism, which explains, how the universe works, how physics works, how religion works, how spirituality works, how ufology works, how it all fits together. And what you can do, if you're in the grip of some of this crazy stuff, what you can do to stabilize yourself so it doesn't shred you like it did me. I guess I should also mention I also received a lot of ontological shock. Um, I guess it was about 3 months before the UFO summoning. I had a near-death experience. I was just doing my usual, at the time, meditation, uh, using a yoga practice called Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's the highest form of yoga practice you can do. And, um, well, it worked. It worked. What they don't tell you is, a lot of moderns, well, I think, I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of moderns are kind of lazy, I think, they're not used to sitting on a mountain for 5 years trying to focus their meditation or whatever. I mean, people eat their McDonald's and watch Netflix and then spend, 15 minutes on meditation and think they're going to know the secrets of the universe. Well, probably not. So with this Nirvikalpa Samadhi, I was suddenly outside my body. Um, the way it felt was that all the heat in my body started leaving me from the bottom of my feet in a slow wave until I got to the top of my head. And all the heat left my body and my heart stopped beating. And then I was outside of space and time. And I'm not going to go into what I saw because, as you know, everyone who has an experience like that sees something different. And then they all argue with each other. It's like, oh, I saw Jesus and he says you're all going to hell. Or I saw the ancient masters, or I saw the aliens, or I saw this or that. So I'm not going to bore you with what I saw. Now, I personally think it was meant mainly for me. It was something I was missing for Platonic Surrealism, so that's what I saw. But that was very, I mean, when I was dead, and I'm going to put it that way, while I was dead, it was very peaceful. I could see in 360 degrees around me. There was only calm and love and peace and oneness. It was really wonderful. And, there was no thought of going back, but I had this sudden thought of, hey, wait a minute. If I'm onto something here, if I have something that would be good to pass on, I'd be a real asshole not to pass this on. And with that thought, bang, I felt like in the movie Aladdin, where some infinite being was suddenly crushed down into itty bitty living conditions in the lamp. And that's what it felt like being crammed back in my body. And, if that had been it wouldn't have been so ontologically shocking. But with me, I'm not quite certain how long I was out, but it was easily 5 minutes. My whole body was cold. I couldn't feel my limbs at first. I couldn't talk. My tongue was thick in my mouth like I'd never used it before. My thoughts I couldn't get one to follow another. It took me almost a year to recover from that. So fully, I mean, I recovered from 80% of it, 90% of it within like 6 months. And here I am, crazy man I am. I was out there summoning a UFO. I didn't even fully recover from that. But I really needed to know. I really needed, I needed to stabilize, make sense of it all. So that's why Platonic Surrealism. Um, just a little bit about Platonic Surrealism, and then I'd like some input from you if you don't mind. So Platonic Surrealism is a framework that's got a fair bit of Plato's sort of thinking in it, but I consider that Plato wasn't wrong about half the time. He liked these pretty ideal forms in some sort of other space as the highest reality. But what I knew is that life in reality is kind of down and dirty in the trenches, and it's not full of pretty forms. It's full of all forms, perfect, imperfect, rational, irrational. It's the whole thing. So, and I got a good dose of Nietzsche, and he was very informative. Now, you may think that I went off and read Plato or read Nietzsche, or read this person or read that person. No, I didn't. I didn't read any of these people. I knew all but nothing about any of these people. I knew their names. I knew maybe one thing about them, like Plato's cave. And Nietzsche said that God is dead. I knew nothing about these people, but it's like they were standing at my shoulder, and I could know what they knew. And I get in these big arguments inside of myself between Plato and Nietzsche and me. And I can explain what that means. Maybe not in this interview. It's a little technically complex, but they were imaginal characters, so to speak. But one time I saw a dog being abused, and I broke down and almost died, and I realized I was replaying something that Nietzsche experienced with a horse. I didn't find out about it till sometime later. So it's like my muse could tap into these gentlemen. And so just a tease about Platonic Surrealism, and then I'd like feedback from you. The reason it's called Platonic Surrealism is that there are forms. Except for in Platonic Surrealism, we talk about the main thing that exists or doesn't exist, potentiality, and I scream it out in all caps because it's more powerful than God or anything. Any human concept, like God's a human concept. I mean, before humans, the deer weren't thinking about God. No, humans came up with the idea about God. So potentiality is simply like a field in physics, but it's more than that. But well, let's pretend it's a field of physics. And all potential properties that could exist here, there, anywhere, anytime, any place, any universe, any configuration, a vast pool of all potential possibilities is what potentiality is. And it's a form of the concept in philosophy of eternalism. As far as I can see, there's nothing before potentiality, because everything springs from, well, the potential to exist. How do you go before the potential to exist? There's nothing above the potential to exist. So there's potentiality, and then there's awareness. Awareness and potentiality are above mind. Awareness is a very special set of properties, and potentiality, it's the raw ability to perceive. And between them, awareness looks at the potentials in potentiality and dreams things up. And that's why the word surrealism is in there. You see, Platonic Surrealism says that, it's not like we're in a simulation. There's all this talk about simulations these days. It's not like we're in a simulation, because that means there's a real physical world somewhere. Platonic Surrealism says there is no real physical world anywhere, that there's only dreams. And part of Platonic Surrealism is called the Gentleman's Agreement. And it's simply that at the core of all our beings, we agree to pretend that these dreams are real, so that we can experience them. So, matter, energy, mind, these are all secondary movie elements, props in the cosmic movie, all the different cosmic movies. And that's, why Platonic Surrealism is stabilizing, why it can reduce suffering, why it can help rescue you from crazy philosophical and spiritual ideas and heal you. All these things, that's a much longer discussion. There's hundreds of pages to read through if you want to. But I would just like to get some questions from you. Is there something that I wasn't clear about, something that interests you in particular? And I need to drink some soda, sorry.
First and foremost, thank you. That was very elaborate and very interesting. There are certainly many questions that I could get into, but just to clarify the last thing you said. So, if I understood you correctly, there is no objective reality, and is that how you would explain that the UFO which you encountered was changing its shape and its character as well?
Correct. It wasn't objectively real, and neither am I, neither are you. We
All
are just
right.
playing
Is
nice with each other. We're in on the con, so to speak. See, at the very top end, everything is based on deception. Now, you've read Jacques Vallée, right?
yes, sir.
And like Messengers of Deception and how these UFOs and spiritual things are so deceptive. Well, actually, reality is deceptive. You see, at the very top, you've got the potential to exist, which then pretends through deception to be this physical real thing or that physical real thing. It's deception from the absolute top layer. And we're all in on it. All living things, all things are in on the deception. But it's not negative. People always wonder in the field of ufology, is this some negative secret, like, oh, they're really demons and they're pretending to be our friends, sort of thing? No, it's all a deception. But that's another name for art. Art is a deception too. Deception isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, in Platonic Surrealism, it's the only thing that actually exists is deception.
Uh, is there a hierarchy of deception? Because people take part in ayahuasca ceremonies, participate in rituals, or meditate very extensively to reach heightened states of consciousness. So, is there a greater level of awareness to be gained that allows you to glimpse into a true form of what reality might be?
Yes, but Platonic Surrealism doesn't go for this elitism crap. It won't go for it. One of the primary concepts in Platonic Surrealism is ontological equivalence. It doesn't have gurus who just, ooh, I'm a guru and I know all this and my consciousness is so high and yours is so low. It doesn't do that. Because if everything is play, yeah, sure, some people play a guru and they can, like Catholic saints in the book, they flew. That's one of the best books on the topic you can find anywhere. I don't know if you've read it. But Catholic saints flew. I mean, there was one that flew after Allied bomber planes to protect this monastery. This stuff actually happens. Now, you could say that there are higher and lower levels of deception. You could say that it's a more elaborate fantasy, it's a more elaborate dream. Or actually, you could say it's got more information bits in it, you see. Because potentiality has all the bits. Like, say, reality is a giant quantum computer, just to use an example. Well, potentiality is like an infinite number of quantum qubits. And that's as good as it gets. But, people want to turn potentiality into God, which is certainly not true. Because God is a narrow human concept. It's a magnification of the human ego, and then you go and kill people you don't like because they worship a different sense of ego self than you do. That's no God, not to me, not in Platonic Surrealism. Anyway, but the more bits that you are aware of, the better the dream production you can make. So yeah, these there are basically more advanced beings than us in a sense, in that they have a greater awareness of more bits of potentiality than we do, and they're better at manipulating it than we are. It's all a game, though. Spirituality is called the final game because most people live their life and they don't try to crack the operating system of reality, or however you want to put it in the modern world. But spirituality is trying to like get the cheat codes to life and to, ascend out of here from this world of pain and difficulty and all that. But all you're doing is you're just entering a different theater. It's a different movie production. And yeah, there probably is some more bits of information and potentiality that you become aware of as you heighten your awareness. But it doesn't mean you're better than anyone else.
So, how does one broaden one's awareness of potentialities?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of practices you can do. I'm documenting them right now. I've got a little study group. I'm going to make videos about them. And I'm not going to hide anything. A lot of this stuff would have been a initiation secret that you promised to die if you reveal it. Well, no one gave me this who was living anyway, so I'm under no obligation not to reveal the information. And all I want is a fair hearing. I want this out there so it can be discussed, see what works, what doesn't work, what problems may arise, you know. This stuff is a little dangerous, let's be honest, because when you try to rewire your nervous system, basically, um, there's more to it than the nervous system, but the nervous system's a very strong component. We are both, to use old words that Platonic Surrealism doesn't use, we're both spirit and flesh. We're both at the same time. So, unlike non-dualism, for example, which says, well, you're going to become this, Casper the Ghost being, and then you'll shed your body and you'll live in some paradise forever. No. In Platonic Surrealism, awareness and potentiality are here right now. They're not in some faraway realm or dimension or ascension. They're here. And everything you see is them in action. And all these spiritual worlds and other worlds, they're just other movies, and they're all playing at the same time. There's a thing in physics called the block universe, which came from Einstein. And it's taken very, very seriously in physics. It simply says everything that can happen, does happen and is happening right now concurrently. And potentiality is even more multitasking than that. It's everything that could happen is happening. And so the movies themselves kind of get beingness and sentience, and then they get confused. They think they're realer than they really are. And then you could take something like Buddhism and try to extricate yourself, extricate awareness and its habits of multiple expressions of itself in multiple lives. And you can learn to unplug yourself. Now, in Platonic Surrealism, the goal is not to escape the world. The goal is to realize what you are and to become skillful at living. Because if you go off trying to escape to some high spiritual realm, well, you'll find yourself yearning for down in the trenches earth again. It always happens. It's inevitable because it's a part of us. It's something that we have created. It's like part of our bodies. It's part of the body. The world is like part of the body of awareness and potentiality playing together, so to speak. If you try to run away from it, you're going to come slam right back to it soon enough. So you might as well just get good at it. That's what Platonic Surrealism says.
Yeah.
A lot of people are afraid of like gods and angels and demons and aliens, dominating them and controlling them, and we got to do this and that. It doesn't work that way, really. We're all here together. And sometimes these more information dense beings can, abduct somebody or whatever. And those sort of things happen. But it's all just us. I know sometimes it can get really unpleasant, but it's all just us. All these play products. So you had a question, sir?
Yes, it seems like that experiencing these phenomena or encountering these beings or craft usually is a result of a heightened state of consciousness. So, is there any
Right.
specific practice that you could point to for someone who would like to explore these phenomena themselves?
Sure, sure. If you go to platonicsurrealism.com and watch videos, we put up our own channel. We got a couple of videos there. I plan on it all coming out, but in short, um, there's some very simple practices you can do. Actually, the number one practice that I found most powerful, and by the way, I got to jump in here and say um, it's wise to read Ian McGilchrist, because the left and right brain hemispheres are an important part of down in the trenches here on Earth. So the human ego is an artifact of the left brain hemisphere, and it's what's hurting all the time, because it tries to maintain an image of what it is, what it thinks it is, what it should be, and then the world is always attacking it. You're not smart, you're not worthy, all these negative messages from the world. So if you live in your human ego um, of the left brain hemisphere, you're going to suffer, and you won't be able to hear messages from other parts of your being. You'll be so busy suffering and concentrating on yourself. So, there's meditation, there's some really good ones, there's Zen, there's Vipassana, and yeah, they've got their uses, but there's a very basic practice you can do. It's called tracing and trace state. So it's like this. Just look at an object. I'm looking at my water glass here, and I'm just looking at it, and I'm not trying to describe it or understand it with words or anything like that. I'm just tracing it with my eyes, just calmly tracing it with my eyes. And you just practice that. It really works great if you go on a nature walk. You trace things with your eyes, and then you form a nonverbal intention of, like, what is that? You'll find that there's like these urges inside your mind that you can communicate with that are nonverbal, like, oneness, or, curiosity, or just very basic nonverbal concepts. And while you're tracing the object with your eyes, you wonder, or you're one, and you'll find that you develop a stronger link with your creative right brain hemisphere, which is nonverbal. And eventually you can go for days without a single word in your head if you want, and you can learn to live in this beautiful place, the place that the imaginal funnels through. All the mystic experiences funnel through that right brain hemisphere. Now, and I, we call this the trace state, the state of just tracing with your unconscious mind. And the unconscious mind has a very strong link. It's a lot of it is the right brain hemisphere. So this is not spiritual. This is just physical. But knowing your own body and mind is very essential, because if you don't know your own body and mind, how do you know when you think you're perceiving some message from planet Zeta 9 or whatever, if it's just you bullshitting yourself, or is it speaking the language of nature and the imaginal, which is these feeling, thought, picture things? That's generally what comes through. So you need to become fluent, like an artist, with your right brain hemisphere. And also, while you're tracing, if you just clench your left fist is associated with your right brain hemisphere. And if you clench it as an act of intention, you're grounding yourself in that right brain hemisphere. That's why when I summoned the UFO, I was basically clenching my left fist for 3 days. So that will start opening you up. There's another practice. It's just simply awareness training. You just look at anything, anybody, anything, And this is a variant on something from yoga, from some great spiritual masters in India. You simply go, I am also that. I am also that. I am also that. You're recognizing that all the patterns are part of one giant being, and you are part of that one giant being. And so, a lot of our suffering is because we're so obsessed about ourselves and our human ego, but we're actually so much more than that. Really, like Ian McGilchrist says, I really concur. The right brain hemisphere should be the master, and the limited ego should be the servant to the master, because the right brain hemisphere is like a telescope that can see the whole big picture of everything, while the left brain hemisphere, the rational mind, so to speak, is like a microscope, and it's really valuable for seeing small detail. But if you get trapped in a set of small details, you completely lose the big picture, and then you drop out of communion with reality as a whole. And that's what our Western world is based on. Were those two practices helpful?
Very helpful. Thank you so much. Um, a lot of meditation seems to aim at transcending the intellectual mind. Practices that you just mentioned seem to rather leverage the intellectual mind. How do you experience reality? Intellectually, intuitively, or through a spiritual lens?
No, I'm going to give
Yes.
you the straight answer. You won't hear this from really hardly anyone in the world. I know that sounds arrogant. That's too bad. You know, when Magellan circumnavigated the Earth, he was the first person to know that you could do it, and everyone else who said that couldn't happen was wrong. Sometimes one person is correct or has something valuable to say. Though, as it turns out, in Magellan's case, he never did circumnavigate the Earth. He died before he could do so. His first mate, however, did circumnavigate the Earth. So most people don't know that story. I love stories. So to answer your question, um, what's consciousness like when you live like this? Well, the shysters, not all spiritual teachers are shysters, but quite a few are. They drink their own Kool-Aid. They drink their cultural Kool-Aid. And a lot of them will say, well, you can just go around in permanent enlightened state and Buddha consciousness and yada, yada, yada. It don't work that way. I'll argue with the Vedas. I'll argue with all of them. It don't work that way. Now, is there potential for this kind of thing? Yeah, it's all right there. The potential's there every moment. Um, Basically, it's use the right tool for the right job. When regular, rational, egoic awareness is necessary, use that. When this creative side, the big picture side, when that's needed, you've got that available for your toolkit. And when the larger life itself has something it wants to, your muse, so to speak. I'll just call it the muse. I mean, people want to say, oh, you're talking to demons. Yeah, they said the same thing about Jesus, okay? They say that about everybody who disagrees with their religion. Um, So I just call this my muse. And, I think any writer knows what a muse is like. Any person who's done much writing at all. It's not some foreign thing. It's part of human nature. It's just who we are. So, yeah, I get a lot of interaction with the larger life, the larger world. But since I'm not trying to sell you some religion system. I'm not trying to get converts or put myself up as some sort of teacher. I'm just a guy from Minnesota. I was an engineer, and all this stuff has been part of my life too. So I'm not trying to sell any con job. Um, yeah, I get a lot of Gnostic moments, and I write them down and I share them with people, and I want it to be discussed. If I'm wrong, I want to know I'm wrong. If I'm right or if I'm helpful, I want to know that too. So yeah, nobody is all one thing. Nobody goes around and they only walk on the water and their head's in the clouds. If you try that, what'll happen? It's known. Your endocrine system will overload. It's like you're putting yourself on ecstasy all the time. And you can keep it up for maybe up to a year, but then you'll have a dark night of the soul. That's what these people don't understand. They abuse their instrument. They try to do dumb cat tricks with it instead of just living a good, normal life where you also happen to get these creative insights. Is that helpful?
Very helpful. Thank you. Um, Also, in regards to Platonic surrealism, how does Platonic surrealism explain phenomena that current science struggles to address, such as psychic phenomena or UFO sightings?
Well, we're all part of one being. And I should really tell you that that was one of the most important things I saw when I was 12 to 14 years old, is when I saw a lot of it originally. I suddenly realized I was this giant space octopus, this multi-tentacular being outside of space and time, and all the tentacles were coming down into all the worlds, all the times. And each tentacle is like a human life. And after you live your human life, the tentacle goes back to your core self, which is everyone's core self. Everyone has the same core self. So, and since Platonic Surrealism does not distinguish between mind, matter, energy, anything like that, it's all dream product. You can do anything with a dream product. Some of the dreams are obviously dreamlike, and some are so high quality, high def, 1440p or whatever they call it, high information content, um, that it looks like it's physical matter. And that is physical matter, by the way. Physical matter is just very structured mind, let's call it. I don't know if you're familiar with the fellow Bernardo Castro. Yeah, he's a genius, he's a genuine genius. I want you to know, sir, by the way, that while I talk about all this Platonic surrealism stuff and all my experiences, I'm not all Mr. Egotistical about myself being the sole font of reality in this world. It's not that way at all. There are some greats out there, you know? Plato, Nietzsche, Bernardo Castro, Jeff Kripal. I mean, there are some powerhouses out there. And really, Platonic surrealism is not that different in some ways from Bernardo Castro's um, analytical idealism, he calls it, where mind is the main thing and everything is composed of mind. Um, Platonic surrealism just takes it up a level and says, well, mind is a set of properties. So whether it's Platonic surrealism's properties in conjunction with awareness, whether it's, by the way, potentialities, what we call a tier one thing, awareness is tier two, and everything else is tier three. Mind, you know, spirit, God, gods, UFOs, everything sticks. Everything else is at tier three because it's like tier one and tier two tier one and tier two together are like a movie projector, and everything else is what's projected. So yeah, I mean, like my computer crashed, right? But in the back end, you can just splice it together and make it look like anything you want. That's how reality is. Same thing.
Yeah, you mentioned some greats there, and you explored many spiritual, mystical, and occult systems throughout your life. Which thinkers, philosophers, or authors have had the most significant influence on your worldview and development of Platonic surrealism?
Well, actually, Jeff Kripal, he was a definite influence. I'd never studied the Imaginal. I kind of knew it existed as a tier three play product, but I didn't know there was this rich history of it. And so that was very formative for me. Um, Plato was an influence, but I never read any of his material. I've never read Plato's Republic or all his three main, whatever, however many works he's got. I never read him, but I had him like standing next to me in a manner of speaking. Now, do I think it was his disembodied ghost? No. But if we're all part of one being, those parts are always going to be with us. So it's like I learned Platonic thinking from the source and Nietzsche. Nietzsche, now there was a guy. There was a guy. Um, yeah, master slave mentality, absolutely very important. The camel, the lion and the child, very beautifully weaves into Platonic Surrealism stages. When you first start out, you're a victim, you're a slave, you're a camel. You carry the burdens of the world on your back. That's the metaphor. You don't know any better. It's like you're a king, but people have convinced you that you're a pauper and then that you should give your money to them. That's capitalism in the modern world, is a giant sucking noise of wealth transfer between the lower and middle classes to the wealthy, who then want to reduce the whole world to AI, where there's like 10 people still alive with all the power and money, and everyone else is either killed off or slaves. That's the future we're building, my friend, and I don't like it. Nietzsche wouldn't like it. So definitely Nietzsche was a big influence. Excuse me. Nietzsche, Plato, Jeff Kripal. Um, I really do appreciate. I throw a lot of slings and arrows at different traditions and schools, but I do have a deep love for a number of them. You know, Advaita Vedanta, just beautiful. Um, you know, Vipassana and Zen. What happens in some of these systems is you think you've mastered them, then you become the anana, pardon me, the not self, the empty self. You've achieved emptiness and all this. And yeah, that is a stage on the process you can take. But then if you stick with it long enough, most of these people, they won't admit it, even the spiritual teachers. They start getting thrown back into the messiness of life again. And they start getting like psychic phenomena, things that they're not supposed to have. They're supposed to be transcended from all that. And so Platonic Surrealism says, hey, yeah, you can take that awareness trip. Great. But Platonic Surrealism is like, I see you're connecting, you're disconnecting there. Okay, you blinked. It'll all work out. Um, when I was a kid, yeah, okay, thumbs up. When I was a kid, I had one of these Gnostic experiences that I was like this giant space worm, like a cosmic string fragment from physics. And one end of me was pure awareness, rooted in pure awareness, and the other end of me was rooted in pure matter. And I was both things. And that's really very true, actually. Um, Here's the thing: when everything is happening in one being, all the sub beings, all the little lives, when everything's happening in one being, you can't run away from yourself. You can't run away to nirvana, because that tail in the physical world will yank you out of it eventually. It's like what happened to me when I died. I could have probably stayed in that state forever, but the physical tail of me yanked me back into the world. So Platonic Surrealism simply honors that it's our place to live in the middle, that as long as awareness is living as beings, it's going to want to keep doing that in many forms, in all times, in all, one day a butterfly, the next day king of the world, and that's our true, unlimited, unbound nature.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that beautiful answer. Um, some claim that UFOs reconcile physics and spirituality due to their physical aspects and influence on consciousness. What's your perspective on what exactly they are?
Okay, well, I have this information, though before I say it, excuse me, there are a myriad of intermediate perceptions and delusions and misidentifications and even intermediate spiritual beings, let's call them, like fairies. um if you want to, you could say jinn or angels or demons. These are all imaginal creatures cooked up in a human mind, but they get powerful because millions of people believe in them. They add their information to them until they become solid and real. Like Christianity, for example, it created God, it created heaven and hell with all the worship energy, so to speak. That's what happens. And as detailed in the book, it's possible to concentrate this, what I call dream substance, in your body. And shamans know how to do it. And you can concentrate it and you can release it, and you'll see something like an orb sometimes. And orbs can, assume any shape they want. So, like Chris Bledsoe orbs, they're dream substance. I know he wants them to be angels or whatever he wants them to be, but shaman throughout the world from all of history know. I'm not calling him out. It sounds like I'm calling him out. I don't mean to. I'm just saying that shamans can use dream substance and materialize things. I mean, at least enough to be perceived. Having enough, let's call it energy and information density to make something physical all the way, that's a tough trick. Most people don't have the skill for that. I certainly don't. So, yeah, this whole ufology thing is just crazy right now. They've got people, going to Capitol Hill and saying they've got proof of nuts and bolts craft, and bodies and all this. But none of these people themselves have ever seen anything. It's like, well, they got a friend who had a friend who saw these things, and everyone trusts each other, so you should trust them too. Now, could there possibly be a ship from another system that comes here and crashes? Now, of course, the thing with that is, so let's say it comes from the other end of the universe. It flies past, a trillion black holes and exploding suns, and it's all great with their super technology. But the second it comes to Earth's atmosphere, it's got to crash in Kansas and be seen by a potato farmer. And then, these aliens, who can go from one end of the universe to the other, they let their ships be captured. Right. And then, the humans have the technology. Well, that's very convenient. The military industrial complex wants to have a narrative that we need more funding for them because these things are real and we got to fight them, or something of that nature. There's all these self-serving narratives about the UFO topic. So, anyone who knows UFOs knows that something like 95% of all UFO sightings are simple misidentifications. For example, there was a fellow who's very famous who supposedly has all the answers to the UFO problem, and he's been in Capitol Hill, and he confused a reflection of a hanging lamp in a pane of glass with a UFO mothership. You see, these are common, these sort of misperceptions and misidentifications. And the SR-71 Blackbird was considered a UFO before people knew it existed, So there's all these misidentifications. There's also another thing that I'm not aware of anyone but me ever bringing this up. I actually wrote a paper on this and sent it through Jacques Vallée to pass on to the Invisible College. It's called the accidental summoning effect. So let's say somebody sees a bird or somebody sees a satellite and they think it's a UFO. Well, it really excites their mind and it puts them into a state of, sometimes some people get into a state of, let's call it shamanic frenzy. See, that's what shaman did. You can read Mircea Eliade, whoever you say his name, um, he'll talk all about it. They got themselves into a frenzy with like music and drums and this and that. So some people, they see something, they think it's a UFO, they put themselves into a state of frenzy, and then they summon something, kind of an overlay on top of the bird or the balloon. And that's actually a quote real UFO. And I think I even saw some of that happen. I'm pretty certain some of that happened like on the Roosevelt event, etc. Yeah, some of these pilots got so excited, you could just feel them just out of their minds, crazy excited that they saw something special. Well, that then summoned something. They might have seen something, and that, it could have been real UFO from across the universe. One of the 10,000 that enter Earth's atmosphere and immediately crash and are captured by humans who don't have technology at 1% of their level. It's such a silly argument. But, I'm not saying it can't happen. Um, and in fact, in Platonic Surrealism, that's called in-dream physics. Physics is a thing and it works. It's consistent within our particular dream. And so there's no reason in the world there couldn't be aliens out there, using physics and getting here. But they're made of dream substance, just like everything else. So it's better to learn what's really behind everything instead of just the outer appearance. And so that's something you get used to in Platonic Surrealism. You look at the top level, you look at the bottom level, you look at the intermediate levels, and there's explanations within the framework for all levels. So, yeah, that accidental summoning hypothesis, I really wish people would talk about that. I think it's very important. Was that helpful?
Very, very interesting. So, do I understand you correctly that if enough people are collectively believing in something, that they thereby are bringing it into existence, and that some UFO sightings might just be imaginary creations that end up taking a physical form?
Right.
If that is the
Yeah,
case,
I know that sounds a.
what
Oh,
what do you believe the UFO that you encounter and the dwarf-like creature were in nature? Do you believe they were sentient beings themselves, or just images of your own imagination that were manifested into this reality?
right. My case was highly disturbing, actually. Um, I'll have you know that a lot of people get into spirituality or weird theories like this as a form of fantasy wish fulfillment. They want to, come up with some excuse why they're not going to die or how they'll be resurrected, whatever. None of the stuff that's happened in my life was like that. It was shoved into my head. It was all alarming. It was all confusing until it all came together. Now, in my case, what had happened when I had that out of body near death experience, the dream substance in my body was ejected in death. That's what happens. Human bodies create this dream substance. It's awareness interacting with our bodies. It creates something called dream substance. Now, some people might think I'm talking about what's called from Robert Monroe Luce, like life force or something. No, I mean there's a faint similarity to the concept, but no, it's dream substance, and that's I you know I was aware of dream substance for about 12 years, and it was the most alarming thing. Uh, but yeah, in a Kundalini awakening or in death, it's the same thing. There's this death ejection system. I saw it work in action. And the dream substance that your body's been generating all these years is ejected and it goes to the great beyond. And that's not your soul, that's not your spirit, it's something else. Um, if you study ancient Egyptian mythology and such, I can't remember which one it was. Ka, Ba, whatever. Their souls and spirits had like 5 different parts. But I just know that it's a real thing. And so this inner essence was ejected. You might also compare it to Taoism, where they cultivate their chi. Or you might say it's from Tibetan Buddhism, that you're generating a diamond body. There's These concepts are out there. Usually you have to be initiated in a tradition to hear the good stuff, but it's true. Everyone does it whether they know it or not. It's built into human physiology. So, anyway, when I died and the dream substance of a lifetime was ejected, it made me feel pretty weak because the body's used to having it there, you know? And so I realized what had happened when I summoned the Black Triangle UFO. The dwarf was actually the ejected dream substance. And it was a little pissed off at me because here I was alive and it was dead and it was a little confused. I was a little confused. I didn't quite understand how reality worked back when it happened. And so we were both a little confused. But it turns out the big reveal in my case, and I'm sure this happens for other people, not just me, but in my case, um, the UFO was my core spiritual essence, right up at, you know, just one dot different than potentiality and awareness. And it was coming as a psychopomp, it's called in ancient traditions. It was coming to gather up all this dream essence and put it in its proper place. And in our modern culture, we disavow all this sort of talk, call it craziness, take it off the table. So we only allow it to either be a nuts and bolts UFO or the Virgin Mary. Or some few people want to see Sasquatch or something, or fairies, but not too many. Usually it's either the Virgin Mary or a UFO. That's what our culture allows. That's what our mind is ready to perceive. So, this dream substance can assume any form. So sure, you want to see a UFO if that comforts you, if you're willing to accept that and interact with that, fine, I'll be a UFO for you. If it's got to be the Virgin Mary, fine, I'll be the Virgin Mary. Or the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I don't know, from Ghostbusters. I don't, choose the form of the destructor. We all do it all the
So,
time.
so with other words, depending on which time period you were born in, and depending on what is um, intellectually possible, then that is what you will basically project into this world. So if we were to live in the Middle Ages where they had fairies, then we would probably see fairies. Whereas now we live in a technology dominated world. So what we see are flying saucers. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
thank you. I
If you
I have
study the
one last.
history, oh, go ahead, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry,
I
please
was
go
just
ahead.
going to say, if you study the history of ufology, back in like the late 1800s, people were seeing mystery airships, you know, like balloon ships or airships. And so, if the UFOs that we see are these shiny craft from other planets, well, why couldn't they have been shiny craft from other planets 100 years ago as well? But people couldn't conceive of such a thing. They could understand that maybe it was like some hot air balloon sort of airship thing. And so you can go back in newspapers all across the United States for over like 20 years. There was all these sightings of mystery airships. That's all their minds could conceive of, so that's what the dream substance became. So once just that basically debunks all of modern nuts and bolts ufology, that it's, just these advanced Star Trek like ships. I mean, I'm not saying that some of them couldn't be from another planet. They manipulate dream substance there too. They call it physics, but it's really dream substance. But that's, yeah, sure, some of them can be from other planets. But the real cogent point is that we see the UFOs that we're willing to believe in based upon our level of technology. So that really
Yeah,
puts mind right in the middle of it.
Yeah. And I think that is what makes UFO so interesting to so many people because it reconciles spiritual, conscious aspects with objective nuts and bolts. Because there are some claims about craft or non human technology being stored somewhere in a hangar. Well, in that case, those would have a definite physical form. How do you address that?
Yeah, I've told you this many times already. Um, yeah, sure, there could be a physical form UFO. I mean, you've got a physical form, right? I've got a physical form. This laptop's a physical form. It's all dream substance. And yeah, there could be races out there that have more advanced dream technology than we do. It, it's usually called physics, but you know what? Physics is simply the most successful magic system humans have ever had. In like the Middle Ages, people would try to summon demons or some dumb thing, and it generally didn't work. But when we want to go to the moon, we build a rocket. It's manipulating the dream laws that are consistent with our particular shared consensual dream. So, sure, you can have nuts and bolts ships. It's kind of pointless, but you could have them. What I think much more fascinating, and I think that even some big UFO insider that was even on Capitol Hill may have said it. The most interesting cases are like when there's a giant football field sized UFO, and then they go inside of it, or it's a small UFO and it's the size of a football field on the inside. But the most interesting cases, there's no controls. There's no doors or screens or engines or anything. It it's like someone wanted to prank. Oh yeah, I got a big old UFO. It's like a fairy. Oh, okay, I'll materialize this big old shell. And it's just dream substance. It doesn't need engines. It doesn't need anything. And I think someone admitted, I want to find the reference, but they admitted that they found a quote craft like that. Now, see, I'm more interested in those mystery airships from the 1800s and the craft that have no technology involved that just appear out of nowhere. Those are actual clues. Those are worth knowing about. That's real disclosure, not this dog and pony show. You know, there's all this stuff about how the government has, lost $2 trillion or whatever. Well, yeah, they're up to some interesting stuff with that $2 trillion, like, building deep underground military bases. You know, the military knows there's environmental collapse coming soon, and they know there might be nuclear war. So, one good use of all those monies off the books would be to build these deep subterranean places to survive casualties, mass events. And I think, and then someone says, "Hey, I saw this deep underground facility. That's where the UFOs are. I'm sure of it." Well, no, it's a survival shelter for the top brass, the military, and Elon Musk types to live down there. If they can't get off the planet in time. That's the sort of stuff that's actually real. And if somebody could prove that sort of thing, there'd be a trail of bodies from here to the moon to prevent that from coming out because the people in charge of that want to be the people who get to go in the shelter. They don't want the knowledge to come out. They don't want the public to be alarmed that there's planning like this. See, these are the sort of things that are actual real disclosure too. It's a level of deception. Remember, I said deceptions from the top to the bottom? So, this is an example of the kind of thing that people should look into, but of course, they could get themselves killed. It's dangerous, that kind of stuff. Um, I'm just a poor Minnesota farm boy that, you know, nobody invites me to Capitol Hill or the Soul Foundation or any of these places. And, I'm not sure that I'd want to be. I don't want to be somebody's political pawn in some sort of power struggle. I don't want it. I want to write up Platonic Surrealism and see if I can make a little bit of a difference with that. That's what I want to do. And meet fine young men such as yourself. See, makes me happy to meet people like you. You're a real you're a real contribution to the human race. Keep up what you're doing. I love it.
Thank you so much for those kind words, and I can only giving back. It was nothing but a joy listening to you, and you touched on so many so interesting topics that I would be honored to talk to you again soon. But you've been very generous with your time today already. So, Kevin, thank you so much speaking to me today.
Let's do it again.